Hello and welcome. So I'm privileged at this moment to have Mr. Tillman. He's the project manager of the United Nations Capital Development Fund. Am I right?
Yes.
So thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. And the EDD has been focused on the role of women being at the forefront of development. So I'm really curious to find out, why is ending violence against women and girls at the core of one of the UN main goal and priorities?
Yeah, I was discussing with a lot of my colleagues and friends over the last couple of days when I found out I was going to have the opportunity to speak here. And I wanted to thank you and also thank the European Union for their support of this project. It's so important. And I've really struggled with providing you a fact-based answer, in part because I can't believe we're asking this question. It's 75 years after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognized the inherent dignity and equality and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. And yet here we are 75 years later actually having a conversation about why is it important to stop violence against women. So on a personal level, I just feel very conflicted because I just feel like we should stop it because it's wrong. That's a simple answer. But I guess on a professional level, and because I work with a development agency, I also have to share that it's not just about having the foundation for freedom, justice, and peace in the world and having equality, but it's also key to prosperity and progress in the world as well. Countries, the world can't progress if 50% of the population is going to be left behind or is too intimidated to participate in the economy. And when you think that 35% of women on global average have been assaulted, and if you look at some countries, and I've worked in regions where we have a very high rate of sexual and violent assault against women, it can be as high as 70%. How can women participate in society, in the economy, in their communities, when they're constantly terrorized? It has an impact that goes well beyond just the household or the individual. It actually trickles all the way up to the global level. And then to think that even today, 2.7 billion women are still restricted from certain occupations around the world. 2.7 billion women are restricted from certain occupations, and in some countries they can barely have formal employment at all. Just imagine the impact of that. Yeah. You know, I think it's, if we want to really talk about violence against women, we have to talk about the right side. But I think we have to talk about the development side as well. And the reason I say that, it's almost like a balloon. If you fill a balloon with air, it fills up and you create a bigger space. And that is so important in the conversation around ending violence around women. But if you fill it with helium, it's going to rise. So what I mean by that is we can't just look at the legal issues. We can't just look at the interpersonal issues. We have to actually look at what are the development issues that are keeping women stuck in a cycle of poverty, which is also reinforcing a cycle of violence. Because I think the biggest challenge to intergenerational poverty that we know right now is actually reaching out to women and girls. Because the women and girls are going to raise the next generation, and if they're empowered to actually work to build that next generation to be different from this one, I pray we will not be having this conversation 50 years from now.
Absolutely, and I'm really encouraged by you being so optimistic that indeed it's the right thing to do. So I'm really curious to find out more, because we've been having, for the past couple of years, there's been an increase in social media activity. So basically, just to find out, what is the role of social media and new technologies in mobilizing people to end violence?
Yeah. So I think we've seen a lot of examples recently of the use of social media. The Me Too movement, which I think almost everybody in the world is familiar with. And I think it's great because it's giving voice to something that many people, I mean, a lot of people who existed, but they were quiet about it. And actually, I think a lot of people did not realize the extent of the problem. I saw some of the people I know say, "Me too." I thought, I can't believe it. Why didn't you tell me this? So I had to find out from friends that I've known for 20 years through Facebook that they'd faced this problem in their lives. So somehow, in some way, technology can be a factor that allows you on a more anonymous basis, or maybe to get some sense of group support, to actually tell your story. And I think that people coming out of the shadows and being able to tell their story is what's needed to really make change. And as I said, it's not just about people coming together, bond together and try to change things. It's about making the rest of the world aware of what's really going on. And I also wanted to share a few other things with technologies, and we're talking about development. So technology, as we know, is not a solution to everything. In fact, technology itself is not necessarily a solution to anything unless it's used for something that's good. But unfortunately, it can be used for things that are bad. But I wanted to give an example of how we have to really use technology as far as development in ways that it can provide opportunity, but then also talk about the issues that technology raises that we have to be aware of going forward. So I wanted to give the example of rideshare. So technology, obviously, the big thing that we've done with it is the rideshare programs like Uber and Lyft and Didi in China. So you may be aware that in the press for the last year and a half, there's been a number of stories of women being violently assaulted or sexually assaulted by their Didi or their Uber drivers. I was just recently in China, and one happened there, and there's a big investigation. So that is definitely making headlines. But what I also wanted to point out is that because of the technology that was being used, those men who assaulted those women can be tracked. Had they been tracked, they've been found, they can be prosecuted. So technology also brings people into a system that makes actions a lot more transparent than they used to be in the past. I think also in terms of new technologies, the area that we work on very strongly is using mobile phones to bring services to people. We start with financial services, but then more importantly, we try hooking them up to other services. So let's start with financial services. We have now evidence that actually women have access to a digital account through their phone. They're actually able to save more because they have the security and the privacy and the confidentiality to maintain money, much more so than if they were carrying around cash. And more importantly, we're finding that in the digital world, women are actually performing very well. As an example, a survey of households in Kenya, 194,000 households, saw that those were lifted out of poverty as a result of the use of digital accounts, but female head of households actually performs better than men. On another stat that comes from one of our research pieces looking in Malawi, we actually looked at the difference between female agents, so those that are out there providing financial services through agency, and then we compared with them with male agents. Female agents really account for about 25% of these agents around the world. When we looked, they actually perform better. So there was an incredible strong economic argument to go back to the providers that we work with and say, you really should be investing in your female workforce because it makes business sense. And that argument, I think, we only know because of the technology. The technology allows us to track the data and know what's happening. So going back to the rideshare, one of the results of this rideshare service is that there have been female-only rideshare services that have been developed, for example, in Australia. So now you can actually make a choice as a woman that, yes, I want to use a rideshare service, but I want to choose a female driver. That wouldn't have been possible before. Okay. So I think with technology is always, you know, it's never going to stop violence completely. But if it sheds a lot more light on it, and if we're very cautious and we're very intentional about how we use it, I think it can also be a great way to enable just women's economic empowerment in general.
Absolutely, I agree with you. When technology is used for good, and like you said, intentional and with consciousness, it can actually make a difference. So we've talked about what we've seen examples of how technology and even innovation is transforming women's lives. But just wondering, what are the barriers to women's empowerment that United Nations Capital Development Fund is committed to fighting against?
So one of our big goals in general is women's participation in the economy. And women face a lot of barriers to participation in the economy. And we do this in a couple ways. Okay. One, we focus on government services. So we help to support the development of government services at the very local level. And at the local level, we insist that women are very involved in the decision-making process. Okay. So there's a whole participatory process as to how local development projects are chosen, how they're designed, and also who they serve. And women have to, in many cases, be at least 50% of that council and have to be very engaged throughout. So if a village wants to get these services, they have to actually bring the voice of women into it, which I think is really important. I think then on the private sector side, we also focus on a few different things. One, a big focus, as I mentioned, is providing financial services. So we've already seen that with financial services, one of the big advantages to women is if you start working with girls and really working on financial education, providing financial services, and really treating them from the very beginning like they are valued members of the economy, it leads to some very positive outcomes. For example, in a previous session we were talking about, or actually no, you were speaking with the UNFPA Goodwill Ambassador. We were talking about early marriage. We've actually seen statistically that if you work with young women to provide them and get them financially included and give them some work opportunities, you will delay marriage. And that delay of marriage has a trickle-down effect throughout their entire lives, creating more work opportunities, enabling them to buy more property and assets. It also can lead to more empowerment in terms of family planning, because you have to make a tough choice if you have a business and you want to have children as well. And while that's not always a pleasant choice, that choice sometimes can lead to different types of decisions by women as to children they want to have and what they want to do with their lives. So I think also working to financially include people. But then I think the last area, which is becoming an increasing part of our work thanks to technology, is it's great to have people financially included, but what do they do with it? And so right now we talk a lot about, okay, you can get the financial services, but the value in financial services is allowing them to buy the things they need, access to services that they really need to develop their families. And it's important because if we look at households, who runs the households? In almost all parts of the globe, you will see who runs the households are women.
Absolutely.
They're the ones investing in the children. They're making decisions around education. They're making decisions around home improvements, on food, everything. And so you have to give them that power to actually consume, and consume cheaper and consume better, because they're the ones that are bringing the next generation into the world.
Wow, that's really amazing. So with all this, there's a new conversation around data. And today, data is perceived as the new oil. And why is having access to gender disaggregated data important? Because we may have a whole range of data. Like right now, for instance, we are talking about more than 200 million girls and women having undergone female genital mutilation. And if having undergone female genital mutilation, and if we don't do anything about the current situation, we are talking about 68 million girls who will undergo FGM by 2030. So why is that important? And why is it we have to disaggregate it? So
I'm going to link your question back to what I was discussing before.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is, so as mentioned, if you can provide some economic initiatives in young girls' lives early on, if you can provide them access to financial services, a safe place to save, a way to build their own future early on, prove to them that they can do it, you have a lot of long-term positive effects. So we know that. The real issue that we face in the developing world concept, or in the developing world context, is that unlike us, where we just assume Facebook knows everything about us, right? They know if we're male or female, they know where we go, and if you have WhatsApp, they know where you've been. However, that's not true in developing world context. Oftentimes, you don't have gender disaggregated data. So what that means is that to actually use the power of technology to reach people, how can you deliberately focus on women if you don't even know where the women are? And I want to give you some examples of the inherent bias that exists, which is leading to this. Yeah. So we work with a lot of mobile network operators who provide great services around Africa. You've heard of M-Pesa probably. Yeah. If you're from Kenya, you probably use it all the time. Absolutely. So some of these mobile network operators, they have to get the SIM registration information for customers. They have to get mobile money account information. You look at their systems for this. When you look at gender, the default is male. So just by having male as a default in their system, there's already a bias. So there's already a laziness about necessarily paying attention to collecting data. So if the people out there registering people and the default's male, well, of course, you don't see actually who's female. We also work with a lot of partners that are using technology to reach women, but there's a lot of anonymous use of services, and so we don't actually know who out there is male and female. So it's tough to actually look at the data and figure out, well, what are the trends? What could we do differently? How could we better serve women? And when we do go out there and do surveys, we find an unfortunate statistic, which is that while digital is really helping with financial services, the gap between male and female use is quite great. So women are 10% less likely to 15% less likely to actually use some type of digital financial service. Okay. And we know that because we've gone out and done huge surveys in countries to see that. And we've also learned a lot about the reasons for that, going out and doing some human-centered design and interventions with them. The trouble is when we go back to our providers and we say, hey, you really should focus on women. We know that they're performing well. These are the issues. They come back and say, but we don't know who they are. So we have to help them figure out who they are. So I think that's why for us, the use of data is very important. And I think the use of data around gender can have a very empowering effect in terms of how we design things. Okay. And then, of course, we also have to be careful about the security of that data as we do it.
So basically, beyond just you're building the capacity of your partner countries to be able to collect and analyze this data. Is that true?
Yes, we work very closely with our partners, and we both in terms of providing them technical skills as well as funding. We help them analyze their data. We help them make decisions. The example I gave you about female agents performing better, that was the result of a project that we worked on with a great partner named Zona in Malawi. And they gave us access to their data. So in addition to the survey work we did, we could actually get the financial data on the female agents and discover that with them.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we've learned, personally, it's been a very enriching discussion, and I've got to learn a lot. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us.
And thank you very much for listening.
If there's any parting shots that you have for all of us who are this session, because we'll be leaving this conference and going back home, what can we do better?
I think what we can do better is talk. And I think personally, and maybe through social media, is that a lot of men out there want to be part of the solution, but they don't know the problem. And so you need to reach out to men that you trust and talk to them. And that may be in a one-to-one level, or it may be through the use of technology if people feel more comfortable. But until we all see this as part of our project, it's going to be harder to find a solution. And then the other, I think I would say, is that because so much of our work has been dedicated to reaching out to women, but it also always makes me realize everybody has either a mother or a daughter or a sister. How is it possible that anyone can think that violence against women is right? When you have that closeness relationship with somebody, how can that possibly be acceptable to you? And I know we can talk about social norms and cultural norms, but I actually agree with the UNFPA ambassador who was just before us. A lot of those are just an excuse to really use gender in the very traditional way of imposing power. So let's not mistake violence against women as anything but the imposition of power against another group.
Absolutely. Wow, you've correctly said it, and I honestly don't think I have any more words. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your session here.
I will, thanks.
All right.